The luxurious brunch was in full swing at an upscale New York restaurant. Well-dressed guests chatted and laughed, enjoying their mimosas and avocado toast. Emily, a young socialite in her mid-20s, sat at a prime table, her designer outfit and perfectly styled hair drawing admiring glances. She was in her element, gossiping with friends and making snide remarks about other patrons. Zoe, a black waitress in her early 30s, approached Emily's table with a tray of drinks. As she carefully set down each glass, Emily's critical gaze followed her every move. Zoe's hand trembled slightly, causing a small splash of orange juice on the pristine white tablecloth. Emily's reaction was immediate and harsh. "Are you kidding me?" she snapped, her voice carrying across the room. "How hard is it to do your job without making a mess?" Other diners turned to watch the scene unfold. Zoe, visibly flustered, began apologizing profusely. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'll clean it up right away." She reached for a napkin, but Emily waved her hand dismissively. "Don't bother. I'd rather not have you spill something else. Just get someone competent to serve us." Emily's friends tittered at her cutting remarks, emboldening her further. "Maybe if you paid more attention to your work instead of daydreaming, you'd be able to hold down a decent job." Zoe's face flushed with embarrassment and anger, but she bit her tongue. Without another word, she hurried away from the table, the weight of Emily's words hanging heavily in the air. In the kitchen, Zoe found a quiet corner and leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths to compose herself. A co-worker, Maria, noticed her distress and approached. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Zoe shook her head, fighting back tears. "I can't afford to lose this job, Maria. My family depends on me. But dealing with people like that?" She trailed off, gesturing towards the dining room. Maria patted her shoulders sympathetically. "I know it's tough, but you're strong, Zoe. Don't let them get to you." Zoe nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. "You're right. I just need a minute." She straightened her uniform and prepared to return to work, her face a mask of professional calm. Meanwhile, back in the dining room, Emily and her friends continued their brunch, seemingly unaffected by the incident. As the meal wound down, guests began to leave. Emily lingered, savoring the last of her champagne. As she gathered her belongings, her hand brushed against a book left on the adjacent table. Curious, she picked it up. The cover featured a striking image of a woman from the civil rights era, her fist raised in defiance. The title read, "Unsung Heroes: The Women Who Shaped the Civil Rights Movement." Emily flipped through the pages, her interest piqued. She paused on a chapter about a lesser-known activist, her eyes widening as she read. The woman in the photograph bore a striking resemblance to Zoe, the waitress she had berated earlier. Intrigued, Emily began to read more closely. The activist, it turned out, had been a key figure in several landmark protests, working tirelessly behind the scenes to organize and support the movement. Her contributions had been largely overlooked by history, but her impact was undeniable. As Emily absorbed this information, she felt a growing sense of unease. The stark contrast between her treatment of Zoe and the inspiring legacy of the woman in the book began to gnaw at her conscience. She glanced around the now empty restaurant, hoping to catch a glimpse of Zoe, but the waitress was nowhere to be seen. Emily closed the book, her mind racing. The comfortable certainty of her worldview had been shaken, and she found herself questioning the assumptions that had led her to treat Zoe so dismissively. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt a twinge of genuine remorse for her actions. As she left the restaurant, Emily tucked the book into her bag, determined to learn more about the woman in its pages, and perhaps, by extension, about Zoe herself. The incident at brunch, which had seemed so trivial just hours ago, now felt like the beginning of something much larger and more significant than she could have imagined. Back at her luxurious apartment, Emily couldn't shake the nagging feeling of discomfort. She pulled out the book she had taken from the restaurant and began to research the activist mentioned in its pages. As she delved deeper into the woman's history, a shocking revelation emerged. The activist had been a close friend of Emily's grandmother. Emily's fingers flew across her keyboard, piecing together fragments of a history she had never known. Old newspaper clippings, grainy photographs, and academic articles painted a picture of a friendship forged in the crucible of the civil rights movement. Her grandmother, a woman she had always seen as a proper society matron, had apparently been deeply involved in the fight for equality. Stunned by this discovery, Emily picked up her phone and dialed her grandmother's number. When the older woman answered, Emily's voice trembled slightly. "Grandma, I need to ask you something. Did you know a woman named Clara Johnson?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When her grandmother spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Clara? Where did you hear that name?" Emily explained about the book and what she had learned. Her grandmother sighed deeply before launching into a story that would change Emily's perspective forever. "Clara was more than just a friend, Emily. She was my sister in arms, my confidant. We marched together, planned together, dreamed together of a world where everyone would be treated with dignity and respect." As her grandmother spoke, Emily listened in rapt attention. She heard tales of secret meetings, of narrow escapes from violent mobs, of small victories and crushing defeats. Through it all, Clara and her grandmother had stood side by side, unwavering in their commitment to justice. "But Grandma," Emily interrupted, "why didn't you ever tell me about this?" There was another pause. "I'm not proud of this, Emily, but as the years went by, it became easier to let that part of my life fade into the background. I married your grandfather, moved in different circles. I told myself I was protecting the family, but the truth is, I was protecting myself from having to confront the uncomfortable realities of our world." Emily felt a lump forming in her throat. She thought about Zoe, about how she had treated her, and felt a wave of shame wash over her. "Grandma, I think I may have met Clara's granddaughter. And I wasn't kind to her." Her grandmother's voice softened. "Then perhaps this is your chance to make things right, to honor the legacy that Clara and I fought so hard to build. It's never too late to learn, to grow, to do better." As the conversation wound down, Emily made a decision. She would return to the restaurant, find Zoe, and make amends. It wouldn't be easy, but she knew it was the right thing to do. The next day, Emily walked into the restaurant, her heart pounding. She scanned the room, looking for Zoe. Finally, she spotted her in a corner, helping a coworker who seemed to be struggling with a heavy tray. Emily approached Zoe cautiously, aware of the tension her presence might cause. As Zoe finished helping her coworker, she turned and noticed Emily. Her expression hardened, a mix of wariness and resignation. "Zoe, I owe you an apology," Emily began, her voice low and sincere. "My behavior yesterday was inexcusable. I've learned some things that have opened my eyes, and I'd like to make amends if you're willing to hear me out." Zoe hesitated, clearly torn between her instinct to dismiss Emily and her curiosity about this sudden change. After a moment, she nodded. "I have a break in 10 minutes. We can talk then." When Zoe's break arrived, they sat at a quiet table in the corner. Emily explained what she had discovered about her grandmother and Clara Johnson, watching as recognition flickered in Zoe's eyes. "Clara Johnson was my great-aunt," Zoe revealed. "Her story has been a source of inspiration for our family for generations." Emily nodded, taking a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about the legacy of women like them and how we can honor their work today. I have a proposal for you, if you're interested." She outlined her idea. A community project focused on promoting diversity and inclusion, drawing on the history of the civil rights movement and connecting it to modern-day challenges. Emily offered to use her resources and connections to support the initiative, with Zoe's knowledge and experience guiding their efforts. Zoe listened skeptically at first, but as Emily spoke, she saw the genuine enthusiasm and commitment in the other woman's eyes. "Why should I trust you?" Zoe asked bluntly. "Yesterday, you couldn't even treat me like a human being." Emily didn't flinch from the accusation. "You're right to be skeptical. I can't undo what I did, but I can try to do better going forward. This project isn't about me feeling better about myself. It's about doing something meaningful, something that matters." After a long moment, Zoe nodded slowly. "Okay, I'm not promising anything, but I'm willing to hear more about this project." They agreed to meet at a local cafe the following week to discuss details. As they parted ways, both women felt a mix of apprehension and hope. Neither was sure where this unexpected alliance would lead, but they both sensed the potential for something significant. In the days that followed, Emily immersed herself in research, reaching out to community leaders and organizations. Zoe, meanwhile, spoke with her family, gathering stories and insights that could inform their project. When they met again, the initial awkwardness quickly gave way to animated discussion. They shared ideas, debated approaches, and began to see how their different perspectives could complement each other. As the meeting progressed, both women found themselves growing excited about the possibilities ahead. However, their enthusiasm was tempered by the realization of the challenges they would face. Not everyone in the community would be receptive to their message, and they knew they would encounter resistance from various quarters. As they wrapped up their meeting, Emily and Zoe looked at each other with newfound respect. They were no longer just the socialite and the waitress, but partners in a venture that had the potential to make a real difference. The road ahead would be difficult, but they were ready to face it together. Emily and Zoe's community project gained momentum over the next few weeks. They secured a small community center for their first public meeting, sent out invitations, and prepared their presentation. However, as the day approached, they began to encounter resistance. On the evening of the meeting, the community center was packed. Emily and Zoe stood at the front, facing a mix of curious, supportive, and hostile faces. As they began to outline their plans for promoting diversity and inclusion, a voice from the back interrupted. "Who do you two think you are?" A middle-aged man stood up, his face red with anger. "You don't speak for this community. We don't need outsiders telling us how to live." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Emily felt her confidence waver, but Zoe stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "I'm not an outsider," Zoe said. "I've lived here my whole life. My family has been part of this community for generations." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "My great-aunt was Clara Johnson. She fought for civil rights, not just for herself, but for all of us. The work we're proposing isn't about telling anyone how to live. It's about making sure everyone has the chance to live with dignity and respect." The room fell silent. Emily, moved by Zoe's words, found her own voice. "I know I'm new to this," she admitted. "I've made mistakes, and I have a lot to learn. But I'm here because I believe in what we're trying to do. We're not asking for your approval. We're asking for your participation. Help us make this community better for everyone." Their honesty seemed to resonate with some in the audience. An older woman stood up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I remember Clara Johnson," she said. "She was a force of nature. If her family is involved in this, I want to help." Others began to voice their support, though there were still plenty of skeptical faces in the crowd. As the meeting wound down, a small group of enthusiastic supporters gathered around Emily and Zoe, offering ideas and assistance. As they packed up their materials, both women felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. "That was intense," Emily said, her hands shaking slightly as she gathered her notes. Zoe nodded, a small smile on her face. "It was. But we did it. We got through to some of them. Do you think it's enough?" Emily asked, doubt creeping into her voice. "It's a start," Zoe replied firmly. "Change doesn't happen overnight. We've planted a seed. Now we have to nurture it." As they left the community center, they were approached by a local reporter who had attended the meeting. "I'd like to do a story on your project," she said. "I think people need to hear about what you're trying to do." Emily and Zoe exchanged glances, realizing that their small initiative was about to gain a much larger audience. They agreed to the interview, knowing that increased visibility would bring both opportunities and challenges. That night, as they parted ways, both women felt a sense of accomplishment. They had faced their first major hurdle and come through it stronger. The road ahead would be difficult, but they were more committed than ever to seeing their project through. In the weeks following the community meeting, both Emily and Zoe experienced significant personal changes. Emily, once comfortable in her privileged bubble, found herself reevaluating her relationships and priorities. At a charity gala, Emily overheard a group of her old friends making disparaging remarks about the lower classes and their constant complaining. In the past, she might have laughed along or stayed silent. This time, she spoke up. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Emily said firmly. "Maybe if you spent some time actually listening to people instead of judging them, you learn something." Her friends stared at her in shocked silence. One of them, visibly annoyed, retorted, "What's gotten into you, Emily? Don't tell me you're turning into one of those bleeding heart liberals." Emily stood her ground. "I'm turning into someone who cares about more than just myself. If that's a problem for you, maybe we shouldn't be friends anymore." As she walked away, Emily felt a mixture of anxiety and relief. She was leaving behind a world she had always known, but she was also stepping into a new, more meaningful life. Meanwhile, Zoe was undergoing her own transformation. Inspired by the positive response to her speech at the community meeting, she accepted an invitation to speak at a local high school about civil rights history and modern activism. Standing in front of a classroom full of teenagers, Zoe initially felt nervous. But as she began to speak about her great-aunt Clara and the ongoing struggle for equality, she found her voice growing stronger and more confident. One student raised her hand. "But racism is over now, right? We have laws against discrimination and stuff." Zoe smiled sadly. "Laws are important, but they're just the beginning. Real change happens in people's hearts and minds. It happens when we challenge our own assumptions and biases. It happens when we stand up for each other, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable." As the students engaged in a lively discussion, Zoe realized she had found a new passion. She began to see herself not just as a waitress struggling to make ends meet, but as an educator and activist in her own right. After the class, the history teacher approached Zoe. "That was incredible," she said. "Would you be interested in developing a series of talks for our students? I think they could learn so much from you." Zoe agreed enthusiastically, feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced before. Later that week, Emily attended one of Zoe's school talks. Watching her friends speak with such passion and authority, Emily felt a surge of pride and admiration. When the talk ended, she approached Zoe with a wide smile. "You were amazing," Emily said. "I learned so much just listening to you. You have a real gift for this." Zoe beamed, her eyes shining with a new confidence. "Thanks. You know, I never thought I'd be doing something like this, but it feels right, like I'm honoring my family's legacy and making a difference at the same time." As they left the school together, both women reflected on how far they had come in such a short time. Their unlikely friendship had become a source of strength and inspiration for both of them, pushing them to grow in ways they never expected. As their community project gained traction, Emily and Zoe's friendship deepened. They found themselves spending more time together outside of their work, sharing meals, and confiding in each other about their personal lives. One sunny afternoon, they organized a community fair to showcase local businesses and promote diversity. The event was a success, drawing a large crowd from various backgrounds. As the day wound down, Emily took the stage to make a closing speech. "I want to thank everyone for coming out today," she began. "But most of all, I want to introduce you to someone who has become not just a partner in this project, but a true friend and inspiration." She gestured for Zoe to join her on stage. Zoe, surprised by the invitation, hesitantly walked up. Emily continued, "Zoe here is a rising leader in our community. Her passion, knowledge, and commitment to making a difference have been the driving force behind everything we've accomplished." The crowd applauded, and Zoe felt a mix of pride and embarrassment. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight like this, but she could see the genuine admiration in Emily's eyes. Later, as they were cleaning up after the event, Zoe pulled Emily aside. "That was really nice, what you set up there. But I have to be honest with you about something." Emily looked concerned. "What is it?" Zoe took a deep breath. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm just the waitress you met that day at the restaurant. Like I don't really belong in this world of community organizing and public speaking." Emily listened intently, nodding in understanding. "I get it. Imposter syndrome, right? But Zoe, you have to know that you're so much more than just a waitress. You're a leader, an educator, and a force for change. And you absolutely belong here." Zoe smiled, grateful for the support. "Thanks, Emily. It means a lot to hear you say that. You've changed so much since we first met. I never thought we'd end up friends, but I'm really glad we did." As they hugged, both women felt a sense of camaraderie that went beyond their project. They had become true friends, supporting each other through their personal growth and challenges. However, their friendship was about to face its biggest test yet. As they were leaving the fair, Emily's phone buzzed with a notification. Her face paled as she read the message. "What's wrong?" Zoe asked, noticing her friend's distress. Emily looked up, her eyes wide with worry. "Someone posted a video online. It's from that day at the restaurant, when I was so horrible to you. It's gone viral." Zoe's stomach dropped. The memory of that humiliating encounter, which had faded as their friendship grew, came rushing back. They looked at each other, both realizing that their past was about to collide with their present in a very public way. The viral video of Emily berating Zoe at the restaurant spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Within hours, it had been viewed millions of times, with commenters expressing outrage at Emily's behavior and sympathy for Zoe. Emily's phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Friends, family, and even her employer were calling, demanding explanations. She sat in her apartment, overwhelmed by the sudden onslaught of negative attention. Meanwhile, Zoe found herself thrust into the spotlight as well. Reporters camped outside her apartment, eager to get a statement from the wronged waitress. Her co-workers at the restaurant whispered and stared, some offering support while others seemed to revel in the drama. Emily, realizing she needed to address the situation, scheduled a press conference. As she prepared her statement, she received a surprising call from Zoe. "Hey," Zoe said, her voice tense. "I saw you're doing a press conference. I think I should be there too." Emily was taken aback. "Are you sure? After everything I did, you don't owe me anything." "I know," Zoe replied, "but this isn't just about you anymore. It's about our project, about the work we've been doing. I can't let that be destroyed because of what happened in the past." Grateful for Zoe's support but racked with guilt, Emily agreed. The day of the press conference arrived. Cameras flashed as Emily took the podium, her face pale but determined. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "I'm here today to address the video that many of you have seen. I won't make excuses for my behavior. What I did was inexcusable, born out of ignorance and privilege. I'm deeply ashamed of my actions that day." She paused, fighting back tears. "But I'm also here to talk about growth, about learning from our mistakes. Since that day, I've been on a journey of self-reflection and education." Emily then introduced Zoe, who stepped up to the microphone. The crowd murmured in surprise. "Many of you might expect me to condemn Emily," Zoe began. "And believe me, I was angry for a long time. But what you see in that video isn't the whole story. It's a snapshot of a moment, not the journey that followed." Zoe went on to describe their community project, the changes she'd seen in Emily, and the friendship they'd formed. "We can't change the past," she concluded, "but we can learn from it and work towards a better future. That's what Emily and I have been trying to do." The press conference ended with Emily and Zoe standing side by side, a powerful image of reconciliation and growth. As they left the podium, reporters shouted questions, but the two women remained silent, walking out together. In the following days, public opinion began to shift. While some still criticized Emily, others praised both women for their honesty and their commitment to personal growth and community change. Their project, which had been at risk of being overshadowed by the controversy, received renewed attention. Offers of support and collaboration poured in from individuals and organizations impressed by their story of transformation and friendship. As the media frenzy began to die down, Emily and Zoe met at their favorite cafe, both emotionally exhausted but relieved. "Thank you," Emily said softly, "for standing by me, even though I didn't deserve it." Zoe reached across the table and squeezed her friend's hand. "We're in this together now, no matter what comes next." In the aftermath of the press conference, Emily found herself at a crossroads. The viral video had cost her several high-profile social connections and put strain on her relationship with her family. However, it also opened her eyes to the real impact of her actions and words. Determined to make amends beyond just public statements, Emily decided to leverage her influence for positive change. She reached out to her former employer, a major corporation, and proposed a diversity and inclusion initiative. Initially met with skepticism, Emily's passion and newfound knowledge eventually won them over. "I've seen firsthand how damaging ignorance and prejudice can be," Emily explained during a board meeting. "But I've also seen the power of education and open dialogue. We have an opportunity here to make a real difference." The company agreed to implement a comprehensive training program and to review its hiring practices. Emily took an active role in developing the curriculum, drawing on her experiences and the lessons she'd learned through her friendship with Zoe. Meanwhile, Zoe's life was transforming in ways she never expected. The university where she had given her first talk invited her to be a guest lecturer for a series on modern civil rights activism. Standing in front of a packed auditorium, Zoe felt a surge of confidence she'd never experienced before. "History isn't just something that happened in the past," she told the students. "It's something we're living and creating every day. Each of us has the power to shape the world around us, to challenge injustice, and to build bridges of understanding." As she spoke, Zoe noticed Emily sitting in the back of the hall, listening intently and taking notes. Their eyes met, and they shared a smile of mutual pride and support. After the lecture, a young student approached Zoe. "I never thought someone like me could make a difference," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But hearing your story, it makes me feel like maybe I can too." Zoe felt a lump in her throat as she responded, "You absolutely can. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." As the weeks passed, Emily and Zoe's project continued to grow. They organized workshops, community events, and even started a mentorship program for underprivileged youth. Their story of friendship and personal growth became a powerful narrative, inspiring others to examine their own biases and work towards positive change. One evening, as they were wrapping up a particularly successful event, Emily turned to Zoe with a thoughtful expression. "You know, when all this started, I was so focused on making up for my mistakes. But now, it feels like we're part of something much bigger than just us." Zoe nodded, understanding exactly what Emily meant. "It's like we've tapped into a current of change that was already there, just waiting for someone to notice it." As they looked out over the crowd of people chatting and connecting, both women felt a sense of purpose and belonging they'd never experienced before. The journey hadn't been easy, and they knew there were still challenges ahead, but they were ready to face them together. The viral video that had once threatened to destroy them had instead become the catalyst for profound personal growth and community change. Emily and Zoe had not only transformed their own lives, but were now helping others to do the same. One conversation, one event, one person at a time. As Emily and Zoe's project continued to gain momentum, they decided to take a weekend retreat to plan their next steps. They rented a small cabin in the countryside, away from the bustle of the city and the constant demands of their work. On the first evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Zoe seemed unusually quiet and contemplative. Emily, sensing her friend's mood, gently asked, "Is everything okay? You seem lost in thought." Zoe took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for something. "Emily, there's something I need to tell you. Something I probably should have shared a long time ago." Emily leaned forward, concern etching her features. "What is it? Remember when we first started this project, and you told me about your grandmother's connection to the civil rights movement?" Zoe paused, her eyes meeting Emily's. "Well, the activist you mentioned, Clara Johnson, she wasn't just a family friend. She was my grandmother." Emily's eyes widened in shock. "Your grandmother? But why didn't you tell me?" Zoe sighed. "At first, I was still angry about how we met. I didn't want to share something so personal. And then, as we became friends, I was afraid it might change things between us. I didn't want you to feel obligated or guilty because of our family's history." Emily sat back, processing this revelation. The connection between them ran deeper than she had ever imagined. She felt a mix of emotions, surprise, a twinge of hurt at the secret, but mostly a sense of awe at the way their lives had intersected. "Zoe, I don't know what to say. This is incredible." Emily reached out and took Zoe's hand. "Thank you for telling me. It doesn't change how I feel about our friendship, but it does make me realize how much more meaningful our work together is." Zoe squeezed Emily's hand, relief washing over her. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but I'm glad you know now. Our grandmothers fought side by side for justice, and now here we are, carrying on their legacy in our own way." As they talked late into the night, Emily and Zoe shared stories about their grandmothers, piecing together a shared history they hadn't known existed. They laughed, cried, and marveled at the twists of fate that had brought them together. The next morning, energized by their newfound connection, they began brainstorming ideas for their project with renewed vigor. Emily suddenly sat up straight, her eyes shining with excitement. "Zoe, I have an idea. What if we create a foundation in honor of our grandmothers? We could focus on supporting young activists, providing resources for community organizing, and continuing the work they started." Zoe's face lit up. "That's brilliant. We could call it the Johnson-Harrington Foundation, after both of them." As they fleshed out the details, both women felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever before. They weren't just working on a community project anymore. They were honoring a legacy and building a future their grandmothers had only dreamed of. When they returned to the city, Emily and Zoe threw themselves into the work of establishing the foundation. They reached out to family members, dug through old records, and pieced together the full story of their grandmother's friendship and activism. The revelation of their connection added a new dimension to their work, inspiring others with the story of intergenerational friendship and reconciliation. As news of the Johnson-Harrington Foundation spread, they received an outpouring of support from unexpected quarters. Emily and Zoe knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but they were more committed than ever to their shared vision of a more just and equitable world. Together, they were writing a new chapter in a story that had begun long before they were born. As the Johnson-Harrington Foundation gained prominence, it attracted attention from various quarters, both positive and negative. Among those taking notice was Marcus, a former friend of Emily's from her socialite days. Marcus had always been jealous of Emily's status and wealth, and her recent transformation and success only fueled his resentment. Determined to undermine Emily and the foundation, Marcus began digging into her past, looking for anything he could use against her. He compiled a dossier of Emily's past indiscretions, including the infamous restaurant incident with Zoe, hoping to expose her as a fraud and hypocrite. One evening, as Emily and Zoe were hosting a fundraising gala for the foundation, Marcus made his move. He approached the podium uninvited, a smirk on his face and a folder in his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice dripping with false concern, "I think it's time we took a closer look at the true nature of Emily Harrington and this foundation." Before he could continue, Zoe stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Reynolds, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is neither the time nor the place for personal vendettas." Marcus sneered. "Oh, but it is. You see, I have proof of Emily's true character, her history of racism, her exploitation of others. This foundation is nothing but a PR stunt to salvage her reputation." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Emily. For a moment, she felt a familiar panic rising in her chest. But then she caught Zoe's eye, saw the unwavering support there, and found her strength. "You're right, Marcus," Emily said, stepping up to the microphone. "I do have a history of mistakes and poor judgments. I've never denied that. In fact, it's precisely because of those mistakes that I've worked so hard to change, to make amends, and to create something positive." She turned to address the crowd. "This foundation isn't about salvaging my reputation. It's about honoring the legacy of two remarkable women, our grandmothers, and continuing their work. It's about creating real change in our community." As Emily spoke, Zoe noticed Marcus fidgeting nervously with his phone. A suspicion formed in her mind, and she discreetly signaled to a friend who worked in IT. Within minutes, they had accessed Marcus's recent online activity, discovering a trail of unethical and possibly illegal business dealings. When Emily finished speaking, Zoe took the microphone. "Mr. Reynolds, you came here tonight hoping to expose someone's past, but in doing so, you've exposed yourself." She nodded to her IT friend, who projected Marcus's incriminating data onto a large screen. The crowd gasped as evidence of Marcus's embezzlement, insider trading, and attempts to sabotage charitable organizations flashed before their eyes. Marcus, realizing he had been outmaneuvered, tried to flee but was stopped by security. In the aftermath of the incident, Marcus faced legal consequences for his actions, while the foundation received an outpouring of support. Many were impressed by Emily and Zoe's grace under pressure and their commitment to transparency and growth. As the gala wound down, Emily and Zoe found a quiet moment alone. "Thank you," Emily said softly, "for standing by me, for believing in me." Zoe smiled, taking her friend's hand. "That's what partners do. We've come too far to let someone like Marcus tear us down." The next day, as they sat in their office reviewing the events of the night before, a notification popped up on their computer. The governor's office was calling, expressing interest in implementing some of the foundation's programs on a statewide level. Emily and Zoe looked at each other, a mix of excitement and disbelief on their faces. What had started as a personal journey of redemption and friendship had grown into something far beyond their initial dreams. As they prepared for their meeting with the governor's staff, both women felt a profound sense of gratitude for each other, for the lessons they'd learned, and for the opportunity to make a real difference in the world. They knew that challenges would always come, but together, they were ready to face whatever the future held.